I'd like to welcome everyone out tonight. Ms. Namika, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Clausen.
Here.
Ms. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Here.
Mr. Taylor.
Here.
Ms. Upchurch.
Here.
Thank you. To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access the link to Board Docs website. It can be found via D38 website, www.lewispalmer.org or lewispalmer.org on the Board of Education webpage. To view a live stream video of this meeting, please go to Lewis Palmer School District 38 YouTube page. All right. Ms. Phillips, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. As many of you have probably noticed, we don't have a lot of kids here tonight. Based on the fact that school was canceled today, we decided to postpone those presentations and awards until our next board meeting to hopefully keep as many of them off the roads as we can. Okay, per board policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings, there is one time for public comment and it is limited to 30 minutes. In an effort to allow all who wish to speak, the amount of time dedicated to each speaker will be dependent upon the number of people who sign up, and with entire public comment not exceeding 30 minutes. If 10 or fewer people sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. The sign-up sheet for public comments will be available at 5 p.m. in the Learning Center meeting room. All speakers will be asked to limit their remarks to the time allotted on the total number of speakers not to exceed 3 minutes per person. If a group of people have a similar concern, the board requests that a spokesperson for that group be selected. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of the schools. We believe that public comments that are critical of district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to those employees and to the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticisms of employees in writing with the superintendent, who is responsible for supervising the staff, then involving the board as necessary. If you choose instead to address personnel issues publicly, please understand the board does not endorse those comments of any speaker and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by the district employees in the event the affected employees believe that any comments about them violate legal standards. Lastly, keep in mind we have K through 12 students in the audience. Please keep all comments appropriate to our audience. All right, I would like to make the following motion to amend the agenda to add consent item E6 to approve the CDE assurances for high school initiative learning opportunities pilot program and postpone items A3, B1, demonstration of learning, and B2 through B4 recognitions.
I'll second.
Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Upchurch?
My one question is for item number C1, the financial audit. It's a lot of information to unpack. Is that something that are we required to vote on it by a specific amount of time, or can we discuss it tonight and vote on it, table the vote till the next meeting?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I'm reading this correctly, requires a separate vote. So we could address it now, or we could address it when we get to that item. It's completely up to you.
I don't care which way we address it. I was just curious if we could vote on it at a later date.
And I think that question, the answer to that question is yes. I believe that the only time frame that we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Summers, is that the information has to be uploaded to CDE by Friday. Is that right?
The CDE upload that corresponds to the information contained in the audit is actually due December 31st. So obviously, we would hope to expedite a vote. However, based on the fact that it is a lot of information, and I think when we have an opportunity to hear from our auditor, as well as from our CFO, Mr. Cruz, we'll have an opportunity to ask those questions and then talk about the most appropriate action at that time.
Okay,
Okay, is that satisfactory?
that's satisfactory.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Eldridge.
Aye.
All right, it is now my privilege to swear in again our newest board member, Mr. Schwartz.
You got double duty.
And any of you that are here to support Ron, feel free to stand up here. I think it's been good to see you. Okay, Ron, just before me, he fell in the seats. Why don't we just do it this way? Okay. Well, we'll just face you guys. It's not easy for you. Okay, does that work? All right, so you stand right there, Ron. All right, I, Ron Schwartz, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully perform the duties of the office of school board director as required by law and will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Colorado, and the laws made pursuant thereto. Okay, now it's my turn to be the photographer. Any family members that want to get your house? Let's get this microphone out of the way.
So, I don't think I can sign in.
Now we will proceed with the public comments. Holly Rollins. Ms. Rollins? And if you'll give me just one moment, please, ma'am. Okay, please proceed.
Holly Rollins, 19180 Lockmere Court. I'm also the Palmer Ridge back chair, and I wanted to report out to the Board of Education that in November, Palmer Ridge and Lewis Palmer had a combined back meeting. It was an amazing back meeting, and I just wanted to publicly take an opportunity to thank the D38 Director of Safety and Security, Dennis Coates. He did an amazing job of informing parents about the risks of vaping. He went into micro detail on drug use, educated parents on things to look for. We discussed social media, bullying, and it was just a wealth of information, time very well spent. And I think it was very powerful also to have a combined back meeting. I'm not sure that the two high schools had ever done this. And I think that we're really getting a lot accomplished in our back meetings to get great content and push that out to our stakeholders and community. So I just, again, wanted to publicly thank Dennis for his time, especially because we did it after hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rollins. All right, that concludes our public comments. We'll now move forward with board member comments. Mr. Taylor, would you like to start off?
Thanks. So I just want to wish the entire community a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday, whatever you celebrate. I'm grateful for the opportunity of spending now 2 years serving in this capacity. Learned a lot. I can't believe, in fact, how much I've learned. And I continue to learn. It's not an easy or simple thing that we deal with when we talk about a public education system. I'm looking forward to change under our new superintendent's leadership. And I think that change is going to be good. And I'm looking forward to being a part of it. I look forward to a cohesiveness that may not have existed for some time. And I'm really excited to observe how good of a school district we have, whether it's academic or robotics or athletics, et cetera. They're just amazing things. And, you know, we get lost in the trenches of a campaign, or we get lost somewhere, and we come back and we recognize that day by day by day, this is a well-run school district with great students, with great staff, with great parents. I'm glad I live here. I'm privileged to serve in this role, and I don't really have any other comments. Thanks.
Mr. Schwartz?
So given it's my first board meeting, quick final note of thanks to everybody in the community that supported our efforts to get here. And to those who attended, thank you guys. We'll pick up your $8.50 a seat as you leave. But from here on forward, it's time to get to work. We have a lot to be proud of, as Chris said so well, but we have a lot to do. And so the magic now is to make sure that we execute well on things that need to be improved, and we don't break anything that's working really, really well, of which we have lots of great things that are working really, really well. I'm really proud to be part of a team. Fortunately, I'm the only new one, so you guys can help bring me along and get me up to speed quickly in a manner that doesn't impede what's working really well. And I hope I can bring something that helps enhance the success you guys have already had. Finally, in the short 8 days that I've actually been official, I've been able to attend several different events. Probably the highlight was Mr. Cruz and I moved a meeting about finances and attended the rally for the Palmer Ridge boys football team. And at that rally, we learned about all the other extracurricular teams that were distinguished, that had either won a state championship, made it to a state championship level, or done something that was beyond the ordinary. And the only college it reminded me of was Stanford, who typically wins more national championships than any other school in our country. And I'll bet if we looked around that we probably don't have the level of the quantity of quality performance in extracurricular activity anywhere else around that we have here. So kudos to the district for doing it right.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Ms. Upchurch?
Well, I first wanted to say that 'tis the season for holiday busyness, snow days, championships, and community. And I wanted to wish everyone a peaceful holiday break and throughout the year as we work together. There's so much excitement and celebration and kindness going on throughout our district and our community right now. And I had the pleasure of attending some of the performances in our district, from Renaissance fairs at Monument Academy to Renaissance Fair at Lewis Palmer Elementary School, choir concerts and Christmas tree lighting, and even at the Monument Town, and even Palmer Lake Star Lighting and Santa on Patrol. And I also judged down at the regional DECA competition alongside with so many other caring community members, and observing our students in action, singing, competing, working, and giving is inspiring, and it instills a sense of pride in our district and in our community. And many of our DECA students actually went on to qualify to compete at the next level, so I wanted to congratulate them. I wanted to congratulate our football champs. I also want to congratulate our John R. Irwin award-winning school, my own children's School of Heart, Lewis Palmer Elementary School. And I think there's so much that goes on in our community, from congratulating one of our Lewis Palmer Middle School students who was recently recognized for his giving heart for Shield 616. We had a Lewis Palmer Middle School alumni who was recently recognized with an Emmy Award, a longtime graduate. And I think it shows that clearly our students, from our youngest to our oldest, are a reflection of the amazing families we have in our community. And we should all be quite proud of our young citizens, our children, and the future that they hold in their hands. And we should also be proud of the educators who have them in their classrooms. They also care for our kids like their own. So it's just one of those seasons that it reminds us. Something that reminded me also is we have something that we just recently did. Our district has partnered with what's called careportal.org, and it's an amazing program in which it's anonymous. Our students and our children in our community are being provided for through our community, and the testimony that comes from that shows the caring community we have. The testimony from the families that are receiving, to the testimony of school counselors, to the testimony of families giving. It really does show that we are a community that cares. And it was a good reminder that we do have a lot to work to do. We also are a community that can get it done, and we can collaborate together, and I think that showed that. I also attended the joint back-end meetings between Lewis Palmer High School and Palmer Ridge High School, and I too wanted to thank Mr. Coates. There was so much education. I think that there was a lot on the agenda, but because that presentation was so chock full of so much information, questions and answers, that it was needed, and it was a good thing. So it was good to see that collaboration. I also wanted to give my fellow board members a brief update. We have been meeting on the school start time committee, and we've been meeting about once a month to discuss and learn what our priorities are, what our challenges are, what are the logistics, what are the pros and cons, and how do other districts that have changed, how have they changed, and ones that have not, why haven't they changed, and what are the challenges, and to ensure that they're doing the best and that we're doing the best for our students. And there's too numerous a study to quote on the research that shows adolescent sleep patterns and the circadian rhythm and melatonin. However, many of the districts do face some of the same situations that we do: transportation, athletics. So it's an ongoing discussion, an ongoing process, but the committee hopes to be able to have a presentation and a recommendation to the board next semester as scheduled. Cheyenne Mountain School District just recently voted to change the start times, but then again, they don't have the same transportation challenges we do. They're a much denser school district. So I've been meeting with other school districts to learn how and what they're doing as well through that process. And I think that's it. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Ms. Upchurch.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Phillips?
Thanks. I just want to recognize a few things. I have had the pleasure to attend a couple of back meetings and GELT meetings, and I'm just always impressed with how many invested and supportive parents and community members we have. And I want you to know that we feel that support as board members, and I think we feel it, that I can't speak for the administration, but we have a really involved community, and I think that's really, really important to go back to when the work gets hard and we're not, quite sure what direction we're going next, that we have that community support. I also wanted to mention that I was at another SO Coalition meeting, Social Emotional Wellness. They were able to sponsor QPR training in both high schools a number of weeks ago. QPR training is Question, Persuade, Refer training with regard to suicide prevention. They had, I think the number was 77 total high school kids were in those two trainings. In conjunction with that, during the week, they also had 2 trainings for adults, one at the Y and one at a school site. There were about 40 adults trained as well. The conversations continue after those trainings, which are always a very positive element of bringing those types of programs in. I can tell you that afterwards, a number of students, they feel relieved to be able to talk about mental wellness,
suicide prevention. They say things that like it's on their mind every day, and they're really relieved that they can talk about it with other adults and with their peers. So the SO Coalition is quite action-oriented, and they are looking at bringing in some future training programs. Those are yet to be decided, but I'll be glad to update the board as those come along. There are some active messaging campaigns, and it's important to know that much of this has been student-driven. And my hat is off, especially to those kiddos at PR, because in a very short time frame, I think it was 10 days, they got almost 50 kids to come to QPR training, and they're following up with some other important initiatives. So, you know, the kids involved are really spurring on more and more conversation and more investment from the entire community. So I'm really grateful for that. I also wanted to mention that like Tiffany said, tis the season for a lot of music, a lot of art, and a lot of elementary programs. And I just want to recognize, I know it's a very fun time. It's also a very busy time for certain staff and teachers. And, you know, then you throw in snow days and kids who might, a lot of high school kids who are dealing with changing their final schedule. There's a lot going on. But a number of our middle and high school students have been recognized at regional and state levels for their for various music efforts, and to them I just wanted to say bravo. They're not here tonight, but we might recognize them in the future. And then echoing what Chris said, I just wanted to wish everyone a very happy holiday season, and I hope that it's very safe and peaceful and restful.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Before I move forward with my comments, just a procedural issue. We're looking at moving our January work session meeting from the 7th through the 13th. And I don't know that that was officially communicated. Can everyone briefly look at their calendars and let me know if that will work for you?
I'm confused. I thought it was the 20th board meeting that was being pulled forward a week because it's on a holiday.
We're trying to juggle a couple different things. So the board meeting will be on the 21st, which is that Tuesday.
Oh.
So just to reiterate, now that I'm on a calendar, instead of the 7th, we would have the 13th.
It would be January 13th. And then our next regularly scheduled board meeting would be on January 21st.
I'm good with that. I don't
Ms.
know if we're going
Upchurch?
down the line.
I apparently already have it on my calendar that we have a meeting on the 13th. So.
It's on mine too.
Okay.
So yes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I got the email out or not, so some of you may have it. Mr. Schwartz?
Fine.
Okay. Mr. Taylor?
I'm still confused, I'm sorry. The work session, thank you, on the 7th is, which was Tuesday, is going to be now on a Monday.
It'd be Monday, January 13th, correct?
What are the times?
They start at 9:30 a.m.
Okay.
And then the Monday board meeting of the 20th is being moved to the 21st, one day later.
Correct.
At night.
Oh,
That
that I
is
don't
correct.
have. Okay.
And that would start at 6 p.m. Okay. Does that
Okay.
work for everyone? All right, perfect. Thank you. I do want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. It's a fun time of year. I also want to thank Casey and his, Dr. Summers and his staff regarding their decision to cancel school today. My line of work, I have a philosophy, you always hope for the best, plan for the worst. And in Casey's line of work, I think that's probably his philosophy as well. And obviously, the last thing we would ever want to have happen is any of our team members or children be injured. So I just want Casey to know publicly that he has my support as well as the support of his team. I want to thank our teachers for,
My apologies.
was that the hint for me to speak up? I want to thank our teachers for another great semester that's wrapping up. A lot of great things are happening. I'm not going to go through everything that I've covered since our last board meeting, but a couple things. I had the privilege of representing the board at the PR football game, third state championship, very impressive. As Ms. Phillips said, there's been a lot of musical performances, and we're hoping to recognize some of the students that have been involved there as well. Want to thank my fellow board members for your time and dedication, and I'm looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and addressing some pretty challenging issues. I also want to thank Dr. Summers, for his leadership and the direction that he is taking our district. I think a lot of great things are in the future for this district. And thank you. Dr. Summers?
Thank you, board, for your comments this evening. Definitely appreciate your efforts and engagement as you're making your way to a variety of events and activities, and I know our community appreciates your presence, your support. We also appreciate your service and your time, and we know that it's a lot of sacrifice, it's a lot of time away from your families, so we hope you enjoy your holidays as well and make the most of a little bit of downtime. As Mr. Clausen alluded to, we also want to thank the community for your patience as we make some tough calls from time to time. The snow days are quite the challenge, but I also want to elevate support for our grounds and maintenance and transportation teams as they comb every layer of our district as we work to make the right call, and just appreciate all that goes into making those decisions. As alluded to earlier, we do have quite a few accolades and accomplishments, and so we look forward to a future upcoming meeting where we'll probably have more than a full house. We may have to expand and find some additional room for everything that we want to celebrate and recognize, but I did want to bring your attention to a few things that sometimes are a little less known publicly. One in particular related to something called the Colorado Gifted Education Review, or SEGR for short. We have a fabulous team of gifted education facilitators across our district, and a recent audit not only was clean, but near perfect review. And so we're anxiously awaiting the final report, but one of the comments that was lifted up is compliments to you and your staff members who are providing such excellent programs and services to gifted learners in our school district. So just another example of all the great work that goes into supporting our students. We also had over the break, specifically at Prairie Winds Elementary School, 17 smart panels that were installed with the support and help of our maintenance and technology departments, and also just want to acknowledge the support of our great PTO at Prairie Winds, as well as all of our schools. We have very strong parent involvement, as you know, and fundraising efforts that help make these pieces happen. On Friday, this last Friday at Lewis Palmer High School, there was also a real neat and unique presentation from some of our students that are in American Sign Language class. And so that is a concurrent enrollment class led currently by an instructor from Pikes Peak Community College. I hope I'm getting his name right. I believe it's Dr. Ayton. So I just want to give kudos to those students who designed and performed their very own rendition of what ended up being a holiday celebration, but it was inspiring, it was uplifting. Also wanted to give kudos to our CTE and concurrent enrollment coordinator, Jess McAllister, and our Lewis Palmer High School assistant principal, Rhonda Spradling, for helping organize that opportunity. You all will receive the audit this in a little bit here, and so we just want to elevate also our finance team, who spent countless hours preparing and finalizing this audit, and so you have a chance to see that in just a little bit. I'm not going to try to be redundant and touch on all the other great accolades and accomplishments of some of our teams and amazing activities, but I do want to highlight another publication that has us currently ranked as one of the top performing districts, of course, in Colorado. We are number 9 out of 178 Colorado districts according to the Denver Business Journal, which is formulated by niche rankings, and I just got this update today, so I'll send you guys the link so that you have that, but again, an ongoing testament to the hard work and efforts of our students, staff, and parents. Also wanted to update you on my first series of student voice sessions, which occurred last Thursday at Lewis Palmer Middle School and Friday at Lewis Palmer High School, and it's just always a pleasure to get to know more of our students and hear their perceptions relating to a number of different topics. Did hear hear a lot about the positive cultures and working relationships among students, as well as the support they receive from our staff. Also heard some very poignant comments relating to mental health issues, as we know that continues to be a pressing topic for our students as well as our schools. Also had some real fun comments and interesting remarks relating to the bond and thoughts about what we could do. And so I would love to invite those students in for you guys to be able to hear it directly for them. They are truly why we do what we do, and our future is in really good hands when you listen to our students. Also wanted to elevate those board members who had the opportunity to attend our CASB conference, December 5th through the 8th. Definitely inspiring to see districts and boards across our state come together, collaborating around best and next practices. And I'm reminded when we're in settings like that of the vital importance of relationships, which is the foundation of not only effective board work, but pretty much at the core of everything we do. So again, just thank you for your investment of time in helping nurture productive relationships with all stakeholders in our community, and our efforts as we continue to go forward to establish clear two-way communication opportunities for the constituents we serve in our district. And then lastly, just a reminder for you that this happens to be that time of year for evaluation, so you will see the self-evaluation that I have performed, and you have the opportunity then to complete your evaluation, and I believe in January we'll be meeting to discuss those ratings in more detail, and appreciate your feedback and your candor as we work from a place of continuous improvement and valuing that feedback. And I believe that is all I have.
Thank you.
Matt?
Yes, sir.
I didn't overlook it. I thought someone else would bring it up. But this Thursday, we are having a board retreat to recalibrate with the new board since Ron has joined us, and I just want to make sure that was announced as well.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate that. All right, next agenda item, consider approve FY 2018-29 financial audit. So Dave and John, if you wouldn't mind coming up and having a seat.
Sure. So thank you for having me. I just wanted to, first of all, thank David and the finance department. And we've worked with them for hundreds of hours over the last couple of months working on the financial statements. And so really appreciate all their hard work and effort in getting this close to the finish line. So as you can see, this is a draft, as you mentioned, kind of pending a couple of final approvals. It's required to be uploaded, the information, to the state, and so it's still pending that upload, so it gives you guys a chance to review, and if you have any comments or things that you have questions on prior to finalizing that. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to go through a couple of the most significant portions of the financial statements. Most of that being just kind of highlighting where things are at in there and what those numbers relate to. I know that this is something that you look at once a year, and for new faces on the board, just an opportunity to see what's included and why things are presented the way that they are. So first on Roman numeral page, I'll just kind of go through this. I don't know if you guys have it up or not, but just to kind of go through some of the specifics in there. Roman numeral page 17. This is our audit report over the financial statements, and so this is an unmodified opinion, which is the type of report. So that's the technical term. The informal term is a clean opinion, and so what that means is that we're saying that based on our audit and the procedures we've performed, that we have reasonable assurance that the information included in here, the numbers that are in here, are materially correct. And so there may be small fluctuations in, what things actually are compared to what are in here, but materially, the numbers in here can be relied upon by citizens and by the board to make, intelligent, informed decisions going forward based on the district's financial position. And so another thing is that does not relieve management. Just because we performed an audit, that doesn't take away their responsibility for making sure that the district is financially sound, that they have good internal controls, and that they're doing what they need to do to make sure that the district is properly recording and keeping good financial records. So that's our audit report, again on Roman numeral page 17. If you then go to page 3, so actual number 3 out of the Roman numerals, the district presents 2 sets of financial statements that are part of the district's overall financial statements. So there's 2 sets. This is the first one beginning on page 3, so pages 3 and 5. These are the current financial statements that the district is required to present. And so what these are looking at is basically current, meaning in the next year. So within 1 year, this is kind of the financial position of the district. This very closely mirrors the budget. And so if you're kind of comparing, and that actually is a little bit later in the document, which we'll cover, but this is going to kind of closely resemble the actual results compared to what the board spends a fair amount of time reviewing for the budget. So in addition, as I mentioned, there's 2 sets of financial statements, this one being the current on page 3 and 5. On pages 1 and 2, if you go back just a couple of pages, these would be your bigger picture financial statements. And so the difference between these and the current financial statements is the biggest things are going to be debt, so bonds, as well as capital assets, so school buildings, land, those types of things are going to be included in these financial statements and excluded in the others. In addition, the other significant item, which if you've been on the board, you may remember for the last couple of years, about 5 years ago, nationwide, the Government Accounting Standards Board implemented a new rule that required for defined benefit pension plans, the net pension liability, which if you're looking on page 1, is $97 million. That liability relates to participation in Colorado PARA, the Public Employees Retirement Association. And so that number is based on PARA's actuaries calculating into the future how much they're going to be required to pay out in benefit payments compared to all of the assets that they have, future contributions to the pension plan, as well as investment earnings. So just wanted to highlight that number being on the district's financial statements. That's not something that you can control or pay off or in any way get rid of other than by removing yourself from PARA or disaffiliating from PARA. And so that number does lead to, if you look at the total net position for the district, it is negative. I do audit a fair number of charter schools and school districts, and I'm not aware of any that on this long-term, big picture set of financial statements has a positive net position. Basically, that pension number puts all of them into a negative financial position when looking at this kind of big picture set of financial statements. So again, the current financial statements, you can see and make assessments on the fund balance appears to be a healthy fund balance, but on the when the pension information is added, that does become negative. So wanted to highlight why that is and why it looks like that. A couple of other sections within the financial statements to highlight, beginning on page 8 is the footnotes to the financial statements. And so this is the next couple dozen pages, which is going to, every number that is included in the financial statements has an explanation on the significant accounting policies, as well as additional information on how that number is calculated or what makes up that number. And so if there is a question on some of those specifics, you can find more information in the footnotes. Then beginning on page 42, as I mentioned, those current financial statements do closely resemble the budget. And so beginning on page 42, so 42 through 44 is the general fund, and then 52 to 58 is going to be for other funds. There is a comparison of last year's budget compared to the actual results. And so you can see line by line how the district did compared to how was budgeted.
May I interrupt here? Because
Sure,
you passed the page I wanted to ask a question about, which is page 19.
Okay?
It's about the capital assets.
Yes.
So in the year July 1, 2018 to June 30th, 2019, we spent $1,396,500 additions to construction in progress.
Mhm.
Is that the plans for the new elementary
Yes,
school?
architectural services, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Then under site improvements, I see a beginning balance and an ending balance with no change. Is site improvements also already being depreciated?
So there's two different portions. Part of the site improvements is non-depreciable, and so that 81,000 is the same, but if you go
Is
a
it
couple
land
lines
Is
down,
it land or something, or what? I'm just curious.
I would have to go back to see
That's
what
fine. That's
exactly
fine.
makes up those.
You
but-
answered my primary question.
Right, the site improvements that are being depreciated and did have additions.
So what's the accounting treatment for those plans for that?
So those would be placed into construction in progress, so they're non-depreciable if the district decides, because I'm not nearly as versed in the, political ongoings of
You don't have to
what
worry
that
about it.
means. And so, if you were to move forward with that, those plans would be rolled into the cost of the building. If not, then those would be removed out from, or if there were significant changes to that, those would be removed from.
So let me
the-
describe a couple of possibilities. One is we build the building. Then that cost is part of the cost of the building. It gets depreciated as part of the building.
Correct.
Two is we never build the building. Then we write it off as a loss. Or is it, it's never placed in service? What is it? How do we handle it?
Correct. It would be written off as a loss, and that would only be included in those, we call them full accrual or government-wide financial statements, the ones that include
Right.
capital assets and long-term debt. So in the fund statements on the kind of the budgetary basis, that's already shown as an expenditure that was already cash that was paid out the door.
And what factor do you use to determine that? Is there a timeline? Because we've spent the money now, we have the plans. Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or is it just a judgment call?
It's a judgment call. Government accounting standards are actually incredibly vague when it comes to capital assets, and most of the best practices is essentially saying management knows better than us as the standard setters of what should be capitalized, how that should be depreciated, how that should be determined. So it leaves a lot of
Thank you very much.
openness for kind of a gray area there. That was a good question. Any other questions? And please feel free, this presentation is kind of for your benefit, so feel free to interrupt me at any point. So as I mentioned, pages 42 to 44, and then also 52 to 58, those are going to be the budget to actual comparisons. One thing to point out is that the district is below budget in expenditures, or so actual expenditures were less than the final budgeted in each fund, which is good. That's required by state statute, so the district is required to do that, and so it did meet that requirement. And then moving on to page 61. This is the statistical section. and
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. Can we
Sure.
go back to 20? You're moving way too fast for me. And it's just me, I promise. So here's a schedule of our debt, right, on 20.
Yep.
And in the long-term debt, the first table shows the balance as of June 30th, 2019 is 58,155, right?
Yes.
Up in the upper part of that, there's two parts that are for essentially Palmer Ridge High School, and then there's the 2001, which was Prairie Winds and Creekside at the time. And then there's a number called bond premium, right? And then I go down below and I see my payment schedule down below, and it only adds up to total of $50,755,000.
Right, that's going to exclude that bond premium amount.
So when we get a bond premium, we can use that for capital expenditure. Or in the case of our recent bond, we said the money would only be solely for the construction of a building. So if we had had a bond premium, we could have reduced the amount of the debt rather than take in extra funds. And it would have, the total payback might have been reduced by, as it is here, by that amount, but we would have had less outflow, essentially. But in this case, what this says is back in 2000, well, it doesn't really break it out, I guess. We just have bond premiums from the past that we've received, and it's, I don't know if it's 5.8 million or what, but on this schedule, as of the end of the year, it still is, it's an amortization, right? There's no real cash being spent there. What's the offset is where I'm going.
Right, so the offset of that is that when you initially issue the bonds, that premium is going to be above, what you have to pay back.
Right.
And the reason that you would be able to receive that is you're going to have an interest rate that gets paid over the life of the bonds that's greater than the market at that time. So generally, the way that would work is you set a interest rate at a certain point, and then a couple months later, when you actually issue the bonds, depending on how things fluctuated up or down, that's where that premium or a discount gets factored in. And so normally that's just kind of an estimate as a point in time, and then as it gets corrected to what the market is as of the actual official issuance date, that's going to impact that premium or potentially a discount.
Okay, we're almost there. What's the offset? So I see this number as a liability. So when it's amortized, what's the offset? Where's it being charged?
Interest expense.
Oh, very good. So that premium that comes in when you issue a bond is what is amortized then back against interest expense, because it's not being paid in cash, right? It's just a book entry. And essentially, we got the money, we used it, however, and then that increases the actual interest cost back to, rather than market, it's the coupon rate. Is that right?
Right, it would be based on the market interest rate as of that day and time.
But plus the premium gets
Right, and so you're
amortized.
saying that you received more as of the issuance date because over the life of the bond, you could be paying a lower interest rate, but instead you received a greater
premium.
amount.
And that premium then does in fact increase your actual interest cost when you account for it, when you book it.
Right, through
Right.
kind of the, if you're looking big picture, how much you're paying in interest compared to, how much you could have been paying if you had structured the bonds differently.
Right. So in our recent effort, we had a 5% coupon rate, and we had estimates at 3% and another estimate at 2%, and it had different premium. And because the payment schedule is based on the 5%, that's what the bondholder, the investor gets. And what happens is the premium amount is greater with lower interest rates than the higher interest rate. And then we get the money, and from a bookkeeping or accounting perspective, we take the premium, we recognize it as a liability, long-term liability, we amortize it as interest expense over the life of that loan, correct?
Correct.
All right. Does everybody understand that clearly? Because there was a lot of conversation about it. And our resolution back in August said we wouldn't take that premium. We would have reduced the amount of bond that we issued to be solely for the construction of that building. I just want to bring it out again because there was a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding around this issue. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one question. Actually, I have lots of questions. So I will be honest, this is not my lane, so this is why I appreciate that I get to trust the experts. I'm still learning as I'm going through and unpacking all this. Can you explain defeased debt, what that term actually means?
Sure. Defeased debt would be debt that was paid off, but it's not allowed to be actually paid off to the bondholder. So instead, to pay it off, you would place it in escrow. So you place it in an escrow account with a trustee, so a bank holds it, and they make the bond payments as it becomes due. So you are essentially prepaying that debt, but the bondholders still are receiving it as if it hasn't been paid off. So that would be sitting in escrow, and so that's why it's still required to be disclosed that it's outstanding, so that's why it's included in here. But it's not actually outstanding to the district because you're never going to have to, at this point, it's already been paid off. There's no future cash flow impact to the district.
Okay, so it's already paid off. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay, so I was just trying to understand why, if it's paid off, but it always has to be in this report, or am I missing?
It has to be included in the report until the trustee makes the final payment out of the escrow, and then it would get removed.
Okay. So when it says the district is subject to a legal debt limit of $102,714,242, is that for defeased debt only, or is that in general?
That is in general.
Okay.
And there is a calculation farther back in the schedule. It's not audited, but it is included in the financial, or the whole financial package.
And then defeased debt is it just COPs, or can it be a bond?
It would be any
Any
debt
debt,
that's been paid off in advance that's still being held by a trustee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me add to that. So this money that pays the debt comes from the property tax, right? The MLO that not the MLO, but the bond.
The mill, yeah.
Mill, right? So the county gets that in February and May, whenever we all have to make our payments, right? It goes into the account. The amortization, do you do it monthly or quarterly for financial reporting? But the point is it's different. We get cash flow in at those two timeframes from the county. The bond payments, I don't know if they're semi-annual or...
Semi-annual.
Okay, so they're twice a year, they make their payments. So that's sort of just a way to describe that difference of timing.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I understand that.
Any other questions? As you're going through the footnotes, I guess to back up with some of the conversation, if you go to page 22, just again to highlight the pension information. So beginning on page 22 and then going through, so 22 to 30 is all of the information that comes from para. I will say the majority of this is copy-paste. There is some calculation involved specific to the district with, the district's proportionate share, so the piece of the pie from para that relates just to the district, but the majority of that is just how did para determine those numbers. And then beginning on page 30, this post-employment benefits other than pensions, para has, it's about 1% of the contributions that get collected get put into a separate trust fund specifically for healthcare subsidy for retirees. And so that note 9 is specific to, again, same information for pensions, but just for that little portion of how they determined this healthcare subsidy and that liability projecting out into the foreseeable future, how that impacts the district. It's still a decent sized number, but it's not nearly as significant as the pension plan.
Could you address the last sentence on page 25 where it says our district's proportion? Where it decreased from the prior year? Why did it decrease?
So in, I can see if I can find the right page, but so beginning,
it's on
yeah,
25.
so if you look at the top of page 25, the state passed a Senate bill that required a direct contribution to para from the state of $225 million. That same payment will be made each year. I think it's adjusted for some type of inflation, so it'll be slightly increased each year. And because now the state is taking on, essentially they're going to continue making that payment for financial reporting purposes. If you look at that table just above the proportionate share that you're referencing, the state now has a proportion that they're taking on by making that payment.
A greater proportion. The state took on a greater proportion.
The state took on a proportion specific to schools.
Right.
Because they had their own trust fund that had their, for all the different state departments.
So in prior years, we've talked about this, and it's like out of our control. And so when the state does what they did with para this last year, as you've referenced, it does reduce our overall liability in the big picture. And that's the difference that they've identified. We went from 0.547, or we went from 6.13 to down to 5.47, because that again comes from para. And this is totally out of our control, right? And that's why when you talk about the big picture financial, it's inclusive because of GASB requirement that you mentioned. But in reality, we have no control over this. So the state is addressing a serious problem by trying to pay it down, and that helped our financial position, but it doesn't, we have no control over it, really.
Right, and so that's what, in my personal opinion, I think it's unfortunate that those big picture financial statements get so heavily impacted by the pension information that it's kind of hard to look at them and get anything out from it other than how much pensions has an impact on those financial statements.
But that's why I also appreciate that you've broken it out separately so we can actually see where we stand.
Right, and so that's what looking at those fund statements is a much better picture of, in the current term, what the board should be focused on. And I will say that it was a significant decrease in that net pension liability for a handful of reasons. They did change some of the benefit payment terms, so there were some limits added that, in the actuarial calculation means that the pension plan will be paying less in the future. As well as just their calculation of investment earnings. They were initially projected last year to run out of funds earlier than 30 years, and because of that, there's a rule saying that they have to use a lower interest rate. And this year, because of the changes with the state contributing and the changes in the benefit terms, they're projecting past 30 years, and so they could increase that interest rate that the actuaries are using. And that had a huge impact, probably the biggest out of any of the other changes. Changing that interest rate changed the pension number the most significant.
Can I add something though?
Sure.
But the bottom line is we're still paying over 20% on every salary for a para match on that. So we're not saving any money as a district just because they've made some adjustments there. We're actually every year it's exactly.
Actuary.
So
Well,
we're continuing to pay more into para to fund the pension.
Yeah, to your point, our contribution rate went up,
Yes.
right? And we saw that during.
Rate or dollars, or both, went up.
A percentage rate, which is
Dollars.
increases money, yes.
And on a net basis, what percent is it of the total budget? About 10? If it's,
Well, we have
if it's a quarter of 80%, it's about 10, right?
right. Well, we have probably 87% is salaries and benefits.
Okay,
So that's a portion of that.
right, so a
So
quarter of that.
20% of that, 22% of that,
Yeah, so a little over 20,
yeah.
yeah, 20%-ish. Okay.
Can I ask a high-level question?
Sure.
How do you determine reasonable assurance in the beginning when you were talking about? Good question.
There's some judgment calls, and a lot of that is, so we determine materiality, which is how we, look at, is something significant or is it not significant? We base that, the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants, they basically issue, here's, what we think is a reasonable, yardstick for measuring materiality, and I'll say basically every accounting firm just copies their yardstick for measuring that, and so Reasonable assurance is going to say that, when I guess to kind of put it into, to give kind of more of a percentage, if we do a bunch of different types of testing procedures, so it's not always statistical sampling. When we do statistical sampling, we look at about 90%. And so, I would roughly put kind of that reasonable assurance at the 90%, assurance that there's not a material misstatement. To get above that would require, hundreds and hundreds more hours and is outside of what's required in an audit.
Okay, thank you. And I wasn't trying to put you specifically on
Oh,
the
no,
spot.
I
I just wanted to
completely
clarify.
understand,
And then
yeah.
also, what parts, this is a lot to take in, and I'm assuming you do this for other school districts as well. So are there parts that are sometimes problematic or specific things that we should look at other than what you've gone over tonight?
You mean in terms of reviewing the financial statements?
Right, or is there anything that's unique to Lewis Palmer School District?
So there were a couple of recommendations that I'll get to. Those would be unique to Lewis Palmer. The overall format and the information that's included is very structured, and so most school districts follow the exact same format. So the comprehensive annual financial report is all of these sections put together, and that gets submitted to the Government Finance Officers Associations, the GFOA, and also ASBO. And so for certificates of financial reporting excellence, and so they, to get those awards, you're required to have the same structure. And so I will say, format-wise, this follows the exact same structure as all of the other school districts that apply for those
Thank you.
certificates. So then, going back to page 61 in the statistical section, I will say this section normally gets overlooked by a lot of people, probably because the font starts getting really small, honestly. It's intimidating. The thing that I wanted to point out with this is that the financial statements are for 1 year, is the primary emphasis of almost everything that's being looked at. In the statistical section, the reason it gets smaller is a lot of this starts to present 10 years of financial information, which can be really helpful looking at trends. And so I would just say, there's a lot of interesting information when you start comparing the trends and looking at how things fluctuate throughout the years. And, having a background as, you do in knowing the history of what's been going on, you can kind of see how the financial statements reflect some of the ebbs and flows that have happened with the district throughout the last 10 years. So again, that's the statistical section. It's not audited. We do make sure that the financial information that gets presented in the statements is the same as what's in there, but there's other financial information that's outside of the scope of the audit. And so that gets prepared by the district's finance team. We glance at it to see if it looks in line, but we don't actually double check all of those numbers. Any questions on that section? I know that's a lot of information.
Well, if I could just have the board members look at page 77, I think is a trend number that he just brought up. The far right-hand column on page 77 shows the student-teacher ratio from 2010 through 2019. I find that very interesting. And it's just one example. I only brought it up because it's just a good example. You kind of have to go find that, though, don't you? It's not right up front and center.
Any other questions, comments? So moving along to page 85, this is the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And so what this page does is show all of the federal awards that the district receives, so all the federal grants that the district received during the fiscal year. The federal government does require auditors to select a sample of these grants and review them for proper record keeping, but also for compliance with specific requirements that they have. And so that's what's described 2 pages later on page 87. And so as part of our audit, we did look at the special education cluster, sometimes referred to as IDEA, as the federal awards that we tested as part of the audit. Because it's the most significant, this program has been tested basically every year at Lewis Palmer as the federal award that gets tested each year for the specific compliance requirements that the federal government puts out as being required to be tested. And so we didn't have any findings or have any issues noted as part of that federal award testing. If you go to page 88, what is described on there is that we did have a recommendation where there were some issues in the grants fund. And to try and explain how, what this means is that as we're doing the audit, we can see what's recorded throughout the year, and we didn't have any issues with the process for recording those. So when cash is received by the district and how that's being recorded and how it's being allocated, we believe that process is correct. But the district is required as of the end of the year to make a determination on how much was spent that's going to be requested for reimbursement and how much was received in advance that's required to be spent on specific grant grant specific expenditures. So there's some grants that are received in advance. So it's received, but it's required to be spent on a couple specific purposes. And what we found is that analysis was not being performed correctly. And so we had a number of adjustments relating to correcting that.
So I guess this would be more a question for us as a district. So with that, how or when are we adjusting that correctly? What does that mean to us as far as how does that impact us as a district? So if there's a recommendation, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, it's an internal corrective action that we will take. And every year we've got something that we got to make sure we adjust. And for this, it'll be something that we need to look at as far as the reconciliation piece and the revenue, making sure that those are set up by the end of the year before we transfer into the next year. So from that, this is from the 17 to the 18. No, it was from the end of the 18 to 19. So moving forward, we're going to make sure and follow up with our guys here that we're making sure we're doing it right.
And so there were adjustments that we found as part of the audit. So we believe that what's in the grants fund as of the end of this year is correct. Just the information that was originally received by us when we were performing the audit required adjustment before we thought it was correct to be included in this.
From the original.
Okay, I understand that.
And so our recommendation there is, we understand that everyone makes mistakes. We make plenty of mistakes, but that there should be a process by which someone else is reviewing. And so, internally, if I do something, someone else at our, really 3 other individuals at our accounting firm is going to be reviewing what I did, and just for looking to make sure that there's, any mistakes are detected in a timely manner. And so we have the same recommendation for the district when we encounter something like this, is that we understand that sometimes someone's going to make a mistake preparing something, but we recommend that there's a sufficient review process that's going to be detected through one of those processes. So that was our recommendation, is basically increasing the review process, improving that, whether that's having a different individual perform that review, additional training or education provided to the person preparing it or the person reviewing it. That would be for David and his team to kind of assess that.
I think
Something else I'd add to that is that it gives us an opportunity to review what our internal control processes are across our system, insofar as we're able to identify where there's those gaps and shore those up, and then educate ourselves, as well as then share it with you all, as well as our community, so that there's transparency in that process. And so we could anticipate at a later date an opportunity to share that finding with you in detail, as well as how we're working to address those processes moving forward.
So if I understand that it's a learning process for us to learn how to be more transparent, but it basically comes down to it was a dotting I's and crossing T's scenario?
That analogy, I think, suffices, absolutely, and an opportunity for us to make sure that we know who's doing what, when, and how, and that we're backing that up, so there's accountability through each of those phases.
But to be clear on this issue, both your report on the federal funds as well as your overall report indicated it's management's responsibility for maintaining internal controls. You guys, do you do internal controls test work in the audit itself?
So yes, we do perform internal control test work, and that's actually a required portion of that federal grant audit. So we select an even more significant number of transactions to look at, specifically relating to internal controls over the federal awards.
Is that the testing then that discovered these issues? So it was independent of that?
Right, and so we do perform testing over internal controls. We, as the independent auditors, can't be considered part of the internal control structure of the district. That internal control structure should be within management and the individuals there. And so
Does your firm provide that services where you're not the auditor?
Yes, but we're not allowed to if we are the auditor.
Because it is management's responsibility, internal control.
Right, and as the auditors, we can't take any management role. Any other questions relating to that page and that recommendation? So with that, I'd move to the two letters that were also provided to the board. And so the one that's addressed at the top to the Board of Education, there's two. There's one that's addressed to management and one that's addressed to the Board of Education. Both were provided to the board for financial transparency. The letter that's addressed to the Board of Education goes through all of our required communication to the board. And so that says, our opinion on the accounting policies, estimates. I will say most of this is just legal required communication, so most of it is not all that specific to the district. It does include a list of, so that recommendation that we had with the audit adjustments that were required, there is an attachment that shows the specific accounts and the adjustments that were posted as part of the audit, and so that part would be specific to Lewis Palmer. And then there was also one other letter that's addressed to management that has a couple of other recommendations. We kind of tier things into most significant to least significant. And so there's three classifications. There's material weakness, which is the most significant. There's significant deficiency, which is the middle kind of recommendation. And then there's just, recommendations that go in this letter. And so the recommendation that was included in the financial report was considered to be a significant deficiency, so that middle level of recommendation. And then these additional recommendations that we provided to management would be that lower tier, so it doesn't get reported in the financial statements, it just is addressed to management as some areas for improvement.
You had mentioned at the beginning, are these ready to be approved, or are you waiting for more information?
So there's, I guess in terms of the timing, we generally like to provide a draft to the board. And so in terms of timing, we're at where we want to be in terms of giving you a draft and then finalizing after that point. We still do have some internal processes that our firm is going through A lot of it is reviewing formatting, making sure that things foot, they're not off by $1, cents weren't included so that things don't round correctly.
But no substantive issue.
Right, and so there shouldn't be anything significant that changes between this draft and the final version. And then also the district is, as I mentioned, uploading that information to CDE, and you're required to go through their website and their format, which I know takes a while. So those are kind of the
Does
next
CDE
steps.
have a validation when you're inputting, if something doesn't foot, for example, does it tell you that?
I know it does have I haven't ever actually done that part
That you've been
myself.
told it has?
They do have, and that's the blank page at the end of the financials is a screenshot of CDE's website that we validate that the totals that were uploaded agree to the totals that are in the financial
Is that an
statements.
audit procedure that you
Yes,
actually
it
perform?
is.
Okay, good.
And also, our department last week reviewed the numbers that John Paul gave us, and we're good with them.
A couple questions.
Sure.
How many of these audits have you done personally?
I don't know, that'd be hard to count. So I've been doing governmental accounting audits for about 10 years. So doing school districts, at least a handful of those every year.
Okay. In your CPA firm, if I recall, they're one of the bigger CPA firms that cater to government entities. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
So in front of me, I have page 127 and 128. Those are 126 and 127. This is a letter that you prepared to the management, as you termed it. Other than what's represented here and what we discussed regarding the para, are there any other concerns that are not reflected, that you have that are not reflected anywhere in this report?
No, it would just be what's reported as that significant deficiency, and then what's been reported in the management letter. Those would be our recommendations.
Okay. And then on the top right-hand corner of each page is a stamped preliminary draft for discussion purposes only. And this is follow-up to Mr. Taylor's query. The purpose for that is you still have internal processes in place for formatting and so forth, but the content will not change at all. Is that correct?
It should be, unless something significant comes up, obviously we would want this to be correct.
And if
But
something
we're not-
significant, sorry for interrupting, if something significant came up, then it would be your duty to notify us, and then we would have to revisit this, correct? So in other words, it's completely transparent. If there's a change, we're going to be back here for round 2 to identify what the change is. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. That concludes my questions. Ms. Upchurch or Ms. Phillips, do you have anything else? I know, Ms. Upchurch, you had a concern about the timing of this.
I did. I was there, as you pointed out, there's a lot of information in here, and it's a lot of valuable information. I didn't want to miss any of it, and I completely understand what to your point, Mr. Taylor, that this is management's working with you to make sure that everything's in compliance, that we're in compliance, that we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and if there's anything that's big and glaring, that it would already have shown up, but anything that comes up, we would revisit. My concern was that this is a 135-page document, and as I was processing through it and reading it, there's terms that I, as a layman, have to reread and look up and learn, and some of it I read in depth twice, some of it I had to skip over going, I don't quite understand. So that was my big concern, was I want to make sure when I'm voting on something that I understand what it is I'm voting on.
Okay. And that's fair. And with that being said, before I make a motion, do we need to delay a motion and schedule a special meeting, or let me know how the board members feel?
Well, I was going to make a motion, but you can if you'd like.
No.
I'm ready.
Well, I don't think that, I can't foresee us needing to do a special meeting from what I understand after asking questions and understanding that the document in and of itself and everything that's been reported is, I have a pretty good I do have an understanding of what this is and why. And we've done this 2 years in a row, so I get it. Again, I just wanted to make sure that if say next week I'm looking at this and I see a number and go, I don't understand that, or why, that we still have that flexibility and ability. But I also understand we need to get this to the CDE as well.
So if I may, and John Paul, this is a question for you. I think we know that we're on a timeline for the CDE upload that is the end of this month. My wondering is, based on the information that's currently contained in this draft, this is all accurate to the best of our working knowledge. If the board decided to vote to approve the preliminary draft as presented, which would enable us to submit the CDE upload on time, would it be acceptable then to finalize the document, make sure that everything is checking out the way that you need to and that we're working in unison? Is there any reason we couldn't forward that final approval for a January meeting? Do we need the final approval, in other words, in order to be able to submit the CDE upload?
So the document does need to be finalized in terms of it needs to have our firm's signature on it. We need to, be completely done with the document, and have that issued. What's not required is the board actually accept and approve that prior to submitting it to CDE. It's also required for bondholders to be submitted to the National Electronic Municipal Market Exchange website. So it's required to be posted there as well. It's not actually required for the board to approve that. It's highly recommended, and the board is a very important part of financial responsibility for the district. And so, it's a recommended part, but it's not a required step in terms of finalizing the document and getting it submitted to all the appropriate parties.
But as you said, you don't expect changes, right? I mean, you're done with the audit. All we're talking about is tweaking little things and taking off the corner tags and putting their signature on. So if I could, I'd like to make a motion. Is that all right, Matt?
That's all right, Chris?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the district audit and comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019 as presented, and to direct Mr. Cruz to submit the report to the state auditor's office and other entities as required by statute or agreement.
I'll second.
Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Before we take a vote, Ms. Upchurch, I want to make sure that we've addressed all your concerns.
Yes, so the audit explanation addressed and answered a lot. It doesn't sound like we need to vote to submit anyway. My concern was we are still dotting our I's, crossing our T's, getting it turned in time. But I do want to take the time to be able to understand the document fully. And if there's some question that maybe somebody in our staff or our district has that we haven't been able to address or you haven't addressed because we didn't know we needed to address it, I'd like that opportunity.
Well, Tiffany, I appreciate that too. And normally we do this in November, and here we are in the middle of December, and to me that's problematic, but it is what it is. If you look at this year compared to last year, the big difference is the pension thing, right? That it really is the big difference. There's not many changes. So for me, my comfort level is pretty strong because I went through 2 years now, right? This is the third time I've gone through this, and I'm pretty comfortable that there's nothing that's going to pop out and surprise anybody. When I see your final report that we actually post publicly, I think it's going to be exactly these same numbers, except for maybe a penny or two here or there. That's what I'm hearing from the auditor.
And my biggest question was the recommendation, and that your explanation I thought answered any questions or concerns I had.
All right, are we ready to take a vote? Ms. Nemiga?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you. Paul, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Board.
Okay, next agenda item, consider approve fund carryover. What's up? Did I to do something out of order?
No, I think it's a clarification, so I'm going to allow Mr. Cruz to kind of speak to what's prepared for you in terms of this action item. The learning in this is that technically we may not need approval, but I think it's important for you guys to know exactly where this carry forward is coming from and where it's going.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, that's what I was worried about, Mr. Clausen, on that, was it's not for approval, it's just for information. But as far as, I had sent over an email to Mrs. Upchurch today, and then I copied you guys on that. You have that document in front of you. Basically, we've got some carry forward funding that we need to move from last year's budget to this year's budget, and it's specific to a few line items. The majority of the carryover that we received, or that we looked at when we ran our reports from last year, is going to go to help balance the budget, because our student count and our PPO FTE count was down from what we anticipated last May, June, when we finalized the budget, to what we have now with our official numbers that were finalized in December. So that's why not all the carryover was moved over to the certain line items that were requested, or to the certain schools or departments, and was limited to what you see in front of you.
Can you explain what we see in front of us? Because I honestly don't know what this is telling us.
So we have,
I see, for example, Lewis Palmer Middle School, Fund 23, Fund 74 with numbers. Lewis Palmer High School, 2374. Then I have Lewis Palmer Elementary School, Fund 75 with a number.
yes,
But
sorry.
it all adds up to something, but I have no idea what it means.
Mr. Taylor, sorry about that. I was speaking toward to Fund 10, our General 10 carryover, which is also part of that. The Fund 74, the Fund 75, the Fund 23, those are all fee-based, and that money does roll over completely into the following school year. So that was what was left over from the different elementary schools, as well as the middle and the two high schools, and all of that funding would be rolled over and carried over into those funds, Fund 75 and Fund 74.
Left over as of what date?
Left over as of June 30th, 2019.
So as of this audit timeframe. So
Yes.
our fiscal year, at the end of the fiscal year, these were funds that weren't spent.
Exactly, yes.
And then the other page, which is Capital Reserve 43 and General Fund 10, are these different somehow, or?
So Capital Fund 43 addresses projects that were continued from last year into this fiscal year. Some have been completed, but they were not all the money was spent during the end of the 2018-2019 school year. So that carries into this year.
Yeah, and I think this was presented to us actually, and we approved it in June or sometime, but the year was coming to end. We had projects in process. So this was presented to us. So this isn't new, I don't believe.
No, yes, it is not new.
But
And this is just informative. Mr. Cruz is clear, we don't have to vote on it, but when there's changes of this nature, we want to make sure it comes before the board and the board is informed on what's going on.
well, I'm still trying to understand the form, and I appreciate your comment. So I'm on the Capital Reserve 43 and the General Fund 10, and I see numbers. And then I see down here a sentence that says, the remaining balance of Fund 10 carryover amount of, in brackets, 441,782.08, will be rolled back into the general fund to adjust the budget based on the reduction of revenue due to the headcount changes. And you're going to present those adjustments in January. So that's a third element here that you're going to show us in January.
Yes, we are going to make those budget adjustments and finalize the budget in January.
And it amounts to 440,000 roughly.
That'll be a significant part of balancing, but it doesn't reach all of our difference between what we anticipated in our student count, or what we budgeted for our student count versus what we have now.
Understood. So that's, out of our overall shortfall, that's where part of it's being made up.
Yes.
Then does that mean that the other one, where these funds 23, 24, these carryover amounts, does that help also offset, or is that something different?
That is something different. Those are fees that have been provided from our community, from our families, and to be used specifically for those areas of activities. So that money will go directly back to the schools.
Understood.
And not used into any of our funds 10.
I understand that, thank you.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Mr. Cruz?
Go ahead.
So there's site-based carryover from every school. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes. The site-based carryover money was not calculated into that 589,000 or the what was left over, which is the 441 that we just talked about. That money, from what I've learned, was kind of an adjustment for salaries and benefits, like if we needed to make some adjustments over the year. And when I see you guys, I'm sorry, from last year to this year, we moved into that site-based budget. And so instead of having one line item, maybe a couple years ago, that had a certain amount of money that was to help offset some of those adjustments, that money was kind of spread through the different, spread through some of the different schools instead of captured into one line item. But that money is actually built into the salaries and benefits, so it really isn't considered carryover. The carryover that I'm looking at is carryover that's from supplies, anything from supplies and materials, any of those type of expenses.
So if I could, I think what I'm hearing is that the general fund is the one we're talking about in terms of the budget shortfall.
Yes.
These other funds are fee-specific that are already designated for certain
Except
things.
for the capital
Right.
projects.
So what's the 146,812 here in the general fund? Is this carryover also, or is that something different again?
The 146,
On,
I don't have that one right here, but is that that's the amount that's being carried over into those certain line items from last year's commitments.
commitments made but not spent,
Right.
and they're being carried over into this year's commitments
Yes.
outside of the budget?
No, part of Fund 10, part of the general fund, but we're anticipated. When they made the budget last year, they had some conversation about, well, we anticipate some of this carryover moving over into next year to offset some of those program or those plans.
So I should be able to find this in our budgeting.
You will be able to once we get this finalized and adjusted in January.
Any additional questions for Mr. Cruz?
So my only question, I want to make sure I understand on the carryover for the schools in general, with us being site-based, and these are monies that came in via fees, correct? So do I understand, is that what you said?
So for Fund 75, those are all the fees that the elementary schools receive.
Okay.
And so any money that was not spent from last year to this year is carried over. 100% of it is carried over into those elementaries.
But it stays at the site?
It stays at their site, yes.
So Lewis Palmer Elementary, just picking on them because they're at the top, at $42,925.47. That's the student fees that were carried over from last year.
Yes.
And that money is now their money to allocate to. Now, what if a family says, "Hey, I want my fee money back because you have extra"?
That money has historically stayed in the Fund 75, specific to each school.
Mm-hmm.
There was a certain portion in the past that was moved into more of the district-wide, but that was a change last year, and 100% of it now goes directly to the school.
So if Prairie Winds Elementary wanted to use their carryover and use it to hire another para, for example, they would have that flexibility and freedom to do that?
Fees aren't typically
Yeah.
allocated towards staffing, so it's typically supplies and materials or consumables.
Okay.
And then Fund 74 addresses the middle school, the high school, and the two high schools. And those are more specific to activities.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Mr. Cruz.
Thank you.
All right, are there any questions regarding the enrollment impact data?
I have one question.
Okay.
Footnote 2 says Bear Creek Elementary School and Lewis Palmer Elementary School both initially built and operated as middle schools. I wasn't aware of that. Was Lewis Palmer Elementary School originally built as a middle
Yeah.
school? I didn't know that.
That's why the library's so big.
So we have 3 buildings, facilities, that were originally built as middle schools.
I don't,
Or I could say 4 and include Grace Best, because it's been everything.
It may not have been built for.
I don't know that you could say built specifically for that, but utilized for that purpose. I would agree with that statement.
Well, it says it was initially built, so I assume it was designed as, those 2 buildings were designed as
Correct,
middle
but
schools.
Grace Best was not.
Oh,
original.
right. I was kidding, sorry.
I just wanted to make a footnote that if you'll notice that if anybody's wondering why you look at something and it says like Bear Creek Elementary has gained a preschool student. We are required and we do reserve throughout the year for our preschool students that when they turn 3 years old, if they are with the Child Find program or on an IEP, once they turn 3, they're eligible for preschool and those spots have to be reserved for them. So they've already been allocated for those students. So when you see new students, it's not like those are allocated spots already waiting for those students to come into that classroom.
Thank you. All right, any other comments, questions on
I
this?
have a question, and that is, this clearly shows that we were flat year over year, and there could be 1,000 reasons, but it doesn't matter, we're flat year over year in our head count, which affects our budget negatively. Where are we in terms of updating our forecast for our demographics here?
So that would be forthcoming in, I don't know that I could say January, but definitely within the first couple of months of the new
So
year.
early next year.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
All right, any questions regarding the financial impact data?
I have a comment, if I might. Again, I want to thank Marcy and Dave and everyone who's done these, because I drill into it now and I see the same kind of information I see on the CDE site. It's becoming more familiar every time I see it. The one thing that I will be looking forward to when we get a little more track record is some trends and year-over-year comparisons. And the question I have is because if I understand it right, Alio has this report writer, and we could actually generate these reports historically. And if so, then we could see some more, instead of just a snapshot in time, maybe see some trends and or year over year. As I've said, like Dr. Benton, it's good to see the data at a snapshot in time, but the trend helps us see where we might have questions. And so the snapshot in time is awesome. I'm beginning to understand it easier every month, but it's not helping me raise, I think, what might be more appropriate questions.
We're in the process of learning the full functionality of that system that you're referring to in Alio, and so we look forward to the opportunity to demonstrate that learning in such a way that it reflects exactly what you're pointing out, Chris, is that longitudinal comparison and what are some of the trends that we can learn about, and how does that inform our decision-making as we move forward.
And again, I congratulate you on where it's at, because this is a huge improvement in my opinion.
We appreciate that.
Any additional questions? All right, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the consent agenda. Well, let me retract that. Before I do so, are there any questions regarding any of the items contained within the consent agenda?
I just have a quick question on number 5 and number 6.
Okay. New course approval and CDE assurances of pilot program.
My number 5 is really quick.
Great.
I love that we are going to offer this course. Do we have to hire an additional staff member to do this, or do we already have one in place?
We already have 2 in place. They've been going through the training and offering different components of cyber through a club called Cyber Patriots. So now it's just working with other school districts to be able to partner in terms of programming and best fit for our students.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
Can I piggyback on your question on that form? Because I see that historically, or at least the form says the last signature is of the superintendent, designee, or BOE representative. Has a board member ever signed these type of forms?
Not typically.
Curriculum specifically?
Well, this is course approval, so not typically. But there is a formalized motion via consent that demonstrates the board's approval.
So historically, as long as you've seen it, you've never seen a board member participate in curriculum or course approvals or anything like that?
Not
Other than
through the
this consent process?
correct, not through a signature process.
Right. I just find it interesting.
Okay, I get task number 6. Can you explain exactly what the High School Innovative Learning Opportunities Pilot Program is?
Sure. So the program itself is through legislation that was passed this spring that allows districts that have fewer than 5,000 students at the high school level to apply for funding. It's a highly competitive process. Only 5 districts are actually accepted into the grant pilot. But the idea is that you can provide work-based learning opportunities, post-secondary learning opportunities, a variety of other types of options for students. So including our students who go to Pikes Peak Community College and access our Career Start program or ISSA, as well as maybe students who access online programming. It allows you to basically only count them for part-time but get funded for full. So it gives you much greater flexibility in terms of how you track and document students in terms of, quote, minutes or seat time.
So the brick and mortar seat time is in the 2 high schools themselves?
Correct. So brick and mortar, there's multiple types of enrollments, and so brick and mortar or traditional seat time is one type of enrollment. We also have concurrent enrollment, which sounds duplicate, but it's not. And there are different requirements for that. And then we do have flexibility around work study or work-based learning opportunities, including paid and unpaid internships. But there are hour requirements for that that we have to document. This would allow us to try to intervene in different ways and give students access without having to meet some of those documentation requirements. Instead, what we do is we write programming goals of what we want to monitor in terms of success for students. We're actually right in the middle of writing this grant. It should be finished by Wednesday, and it's due Thursday. It was a pretty quick turnaround time, but it's a group effort between the assistant principals, the deans, and the counselors at the 2 high schools with Crystal and with me.
So the program could look different for each individual student?
The idea is that you do have an individualized learning plan for each student so that you are documenting exactly what each student would be doing.
Okay.
Great.
And it is state statute that, with this
It was
program.
legislated, correct, yep. So money was set aside legislatively, initially for a grant, like a
right.
pilot grant, and then if they will open it up to more people as they see success in different programs.
And we were one of the 5 that qualified.
We're going to try. We're not one of the 5.
Oh, we're not, it's
No,
not.
there
oh,
are
this is-
many that qualify.
Okay, this is the grant writing process. to
Correct,
this.
and only
Okay.
5 are awarded.
I understand now, okay.
Mhm. It's going to be highly competitive.
Keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, now I understand.
Get your feathers out.
So,
Okay,
great, thank you.
thank you.
Any additional questions regarding consent agenda items before I make a motion?
I have one, Matt, and it's on, what's the number? I'm sorry. E10. So I'm looking at our updates, and I don't know if we need to have an executive session to review this or not, but I'm curious about the summary here because there's been no updates forever. One of them even says it'll be 2 years before we see another update. I'm talking about the legal updates.
Mr. Foster, maybe provide a little more context. I don't know if we can go into specifics, but can you at least?
Without going into specifics, we were told by the governmental agency that is involved that they're 2 years behind, 3 years behind in their findings, and that we could wait not to bother them anymore. Quite honestly, that's what our lawyer's response from them was. They were told not to be bothered, and the lawyer inquired, and he was told, don't bother sitting over 2 to 3 years behind. Ask us in 2 to 3 years. And that is something from, started in 2006 or 2007.
Well, it says in your notes here, the violations occurred in 2004 or 5 timeframe, so
Yeah.
it's pretty old.
It is, and we expect that, actually, we expect that to go in our favor because they didn't ask us anything about it for over 10 years.
And now they've said at least 2 more before they'll
Correct.
ring the number.
The U.S. Department of Education is approximately 3 years behind.
Is there a statute of limitations on any of this?
Yes, there is, and that was our argument. However, they got to wait 2 years to tell us that there's a statute.
That's one of the 4 issues I'm asking
From my
about, though.
office after that phone call, that was it.
So with that being said, Mr. Taylor, if you would like, we could remove this from the executive or the consent agenda and have an executive session meeting in January if you want to discuss this further.
Well, if the board wants to, I'm curious because there's, they've just been there, and I'd like to know where we stand and what the impact is.
Okay. I don't know.
It might be helpful for Ron, at least, and I'm assuming you guys are curious, but I don't know. I don't want to speak for everyone else. I have a question about them.
Okay. Well, would everyone like to have an executive session in January? And we could, actually, for legal counsel, we have to have our attorney present in person or telephonically.
To do a legal brief, basically?
Well, if we're talking about legal issues pursuant to the statute, we need to have our attorney present in person or telephonically. So in other words, we just can't invite Mr. Foster to join us in the executive
Understood, and I'm not pressing for this. I'm just curious, so it's kind of the board consensus that I'm looking for here.
I guess my question, and maybe it's being new, is what's the value of us spending any time on this?
I just have a thought. Maybe we could shelve this issue and approve it tonight as part of the consent agenda. If any individual board members have questions, maybe you could consult with Mr. Foster. And if those questions are not resolved, then we could take it to the next step and have an executive session and invite one of our attorneys to join us. Would that be acceptable? But you bring up a good point, Mr. Schwartz.
Well, I've approved it for the last 5 months with no change, so I'm okay with it.
All right. So where are we at? I think I need to make a motion for the consent agenda as presented. Second?
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none. Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, that concludes everything on our agenda. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns before we stand adjourned this evening?
See you this Thursday.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.